Hi everybody, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Noah Riddick. I'm a junior here at LMU, and I have the pleasure of introducing David Offenberg. So I noticed a lot of students in here, but I also noticed a lot of people who aren't students. So I kind of just want to take this time to speak about a student perspective on what it's like to take Dr. David Offenberg's class, and as I've taken 2 of them. So the first time I met Dr. Offenberg was in his Fundamentals of Finance class, and I took that during my 2nd semester of my sophomore year. It was my first finance class, so I had 0 experience whatsoever, and at times it was really challenging. But luckily, Professor Offenberg was always there every step of the way to assist students like me with whatever questions we had that day. At the end of that semester, he recommended taking entertainment finance, which he describes as the most challenging class the business school offers. After experiencing a few all-nighters in that class, I have to agree with him on that tape. Once again, Dr. Offenberg was always available during office hours, even if sometimes he received the ever-helpful advice of do whatever the financial analyst would do. He continually pushed us to strive for excellence in our work, even if it made finding the right answer by ourselves through trial and tribulation. Something I'd like to emphasize is that even though Dr. Offenberg is always super helpful inside the classroom, the same goes for outside the classroom. Every week he sends out emails featuring different jobs and internship opportunities within the entertainment industry. He also enjoys discussing students' goals and aspirations for internships and jobs after college. This semester, he's been super helpful as well, guiding me and the rest of my e-board for Entertainment Business Society. I see a lot of you guys that have seen at the events this semester. He's provided so much guidance, and honestly, without him, we would not be able to have the successful events that we've had. He has been quoted saying his career goal is to make LMU the world's leading institution in entertainment finance, and it's evident how much effort he puts into this every single day, whether through the guest speakers he brings to his class, the support he provides to me and all his other current and former students, and any other way he works to make a difference. Having guidance like that is invaluable, not only because of his years of experience, but also because it's reassuring to just have someone in your corner rooting for your success. I have many more stories about Dr. Offenberg that I could share, and I'm sure many of the other students here do as well. But that's enough for me. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Offenberg and his faculty PubMed discussion on independent film finance.
And can I just say that I completely forgot to announce that Noah is the president of the Entertainment Business Society. So, go for it.
Now,
Yep.
and I should mention, Noah and his e-board here, Mohini and Dylan and Jillian, just won a big award over in the College of Business for organizational growth for the Entertainment Business Society. They had a tremendous growth in membership this year and a tremendous growth in events, and so congratulations. Do I have a presentation?
Yes, you do. We're coming in a second.
That's okay. Tonight we're talking about independent film. Broadly, there's no good definition for independent film. There we go. Most people think of independent film as being independent from the studio system. So not being produced or financed by Disney, Warner Brothers, Sony, Universal, Paramount, Netflix, formerly Fox, maybe Lionsgate, maybe Amazon, who knows. So that's what independent film is. To help me get a little pulse of the audience, can you raise your hand and tell me your favorite independent films? Your favorite independent films? What do you got?
Mysterious Skin
Mysterious Skin.
by Greg Araki with Joseph Gordon-Levitt from 2004.
Terrific. Mysterious Skin. What else?
Twinsters.
Tell us about Twinsters.
It was basically about a gal who is a great adoptee, and she found out that she had a twin halfway around the world,
Oh,
and how they found each other.
love it. What else?
Primer.
Tell us about Primer.
Time travel movie where the guys make a time travel machine and things go badly.
Help the Boss is an animated series on YouTube, and it's kind of a little bit of a comedy musical about these 3 demons trying to start a company in Underworld.
Love it. I love it.
Napoleon Dynamite.
Napoleon Dynamite. Classic. Classic. Everyone knows that one. And what I love about your responses is how diverse they are, right? There's a beauty of independent film in that it's not just a superhero perspective. It's a broad perspective. When Rhonda and I were planning this She said I should give about 20 minutes to my book. And boy, wow, what a head scratcher. Because to write this book, I interviewed more than 60 independent film producers, people who made films that have been Oscar-nominated, Oscar-winning films, and very, very tiny films. And I have data on how they financed their first film and their second film and their latest film. And with that data, I can tell you so much. But to get there, we would have to go through income statements and balance sheets and debt and equity. And I didn't really want to lecture on independent film tonight. I thought that might be a bit much. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about stuff that is not in my book. That makes sense, right? Let's do it. Who can tell us the most expensive independent film ever produced? Who knows the most expensive independent film ever produced?
Is it Ishtar?
It is not Ishtar. It is not. Ishtar was a studio film.
Oh, right.
Any guesses?
Is it a Luc Besson film?
It is a Luc Besson
It's
film.
in your book, right?
Oh my gosh, you read it. You think you know?
Yeah, is it Valerian?
It is Valerian, yes, it's Valerian. The film is Valerian in the City of a Thousand Planets, released in 2017. Produced by Europa Corp, not a major studio. A couple important financial data points on Valerian from Box Office Mojo. Number one, the budget. The budget was $177 million.
Wow.
Stunning. An independent film produced for $177 million. And then the disappointing part, in the other red circle, is the worldwide box office of just $226 million. By most conventional perspectives, this movie was a flop. It didn't do well. And you'll notice on the domestic side, it did $41 million. Internationally, it did 185, so a little bit better. You might have been in the back of your mind, but not willing to say it, thinking that the most expensive independent film ever produced was Iron Man. The first Iron Man was an independent film. It was produced by Marvel before Marvel was acquired by Disney. It was distributed by Paramount, but Paramount did not produce it. They did not finance it. Marvel financed it entirely by themselves. The budget was close. It was $140 million. But this is a successful independent film, right? The box office, $585 million. They made a lot of money. Marvel, probably on box office alone, brought in, if I were to guess, maybe $200 million in revenue. But Valerian did not do that. Valerian was quite the opposite. And what's particularly tricky here is that with an independent film, with any theatrical release, that $226 million, that doesn't go to Europa. So the money for an independent film or any theatrical release gets split three ways. And so the $41 million domestic goes to the theater, and then there are three parties who get a piece of that. Number one is the government. The government gets sales taxes. In the United States, those sales taxes are pretty low. Around the world, they can be much, much higher. But in the US, it's 4 to 6%. The movie theater gets to keep about half of the money. And then whatever is left goes to not Europa, but the distributor. For Valerian, the distributor was a company called STX Films. STX no longer exists, in part because Valerian did so badly, unfortunately. So STX, of the 41 million, STX maybe got 20 million. And then I would guess, based on the contracts, that they got to keep all of it, and Europa didn't get any. So of the 41 million, there's a decent chance that Europa didn't get any of the box office. And so now, knowing that background, I want to try a little pop quiz. I want to test where you are. How did Valerian perform financially? And I'm giving you four choices. Number one, lost over $100 million. Number two, lost between 10 and 100 million. Number three, letter C, came close to breaking even. Came close to breaking even, meaning that somewhere between plus 10 and minus 10. And letter D, earned more than 10 million. So who's A? Who thinks it's A? How about B? C? And D?
That's a trick question, I know.
You think it's a trick question? The gentleman in the front, tell me your name.
Chris.
Chris. Chris mentioned that Valerian is a Luc Besson movie. Luc Besson is the director of the film, and he's the CEO of Europa Corp. He said, and this is remarkable, the risk to Europa Corp is 4% of the budget, so there's no actual financial risk. Europa Corp spent $177 million making this movie, $177 million, and the most they could lose is 4%, $7 million. Is that remarkable? So even though the movie flopped at the theaters, if you guessed C, you were correct. If you guessed C, you were correct. And so this is truly tremendous that they pulled this off. And then the question is how? Number one, it's with Luc Besson. Luc Besson is not just Mason Higginbotham. He's not a guy going out trying to raise $177 million. He is the director of The Professional, the movie that launched the career of Natalie Portman. That young girl right there is Natalie Portman as a child. If you've never seen it, it's terrific. She's terrific. He's the director of La Femme Nikita. He's the director of one of my favorite movies from the 90s, The Fifth Element. So he is a person who had credibility. He had the ability to pull this off. None of us in this room could. And there are three things that he did to raise the $177 million. Number one is he used government funding. So he went to Canada to shoot his movie. And in Canada, he was able to get 2 different tax incentives. One from the Canadian federal government and one from the British Columbia provincial government. He also shot part of the movie in Belgium. And he got a grant from the Belgian government as well. Those 3 sources together, the Canadian federal government, the British Columbia government, and the Belgian government, paid him about $40 million. So now he didn't need $177 million. He only needed $137 million. Only. The other thing he did is pre-sales. And what that means is that in 2015, before he had shot any of the movie, he went to the Cannes Film Festival in France, and he rented a ballroom at a hotel. He brought his 2 stars, he brought a copy of the script, and he brought about 80 drawings. And he brought all the distributors from around the world who might want to distribute the film. And he said, who's interested? And they looked at the drawings, they looked at the script, they talked to the actors, and they said, we love it. We think this is a great idea. And so, for instance, STX bought the rights to distribute the film in the United States. My guess is that they paid about $30 million for those rights. Meaning that when Luc Besson finished the movie and delivered it to STX, STX had to pay him $30 million. That's why, even though STX got $20 million out of the box office, they didn't have to pay him anything. They'd already paid him. And it wasn't just STX. He got E1 to take the distribution rights in Canada. He got Lionsgate to take the distribution rights in the UK. He got Disney, if you can imagine, Disney, to take distribution rights in Germany, Roadshow in Australia. And he found 135 other distributors who were willing to pay him for the distribution rights for this film. With just a script, with just 2 actors, who turns out were not particularly charismatic, together. I mean, if you know them, I'm sure they're wonderfully charismatic on their own. And so from these 140 distributors, he got $80 million. And so now he's got $40 million from the government. He's got $80 million in pre-sales. He's got $120 million of his 177. So he wasn't quite there yet. But then he found Fundamental Films, a Chinese film financier. Fundamental said, we will give you $50 million for your movie. And what we want in return is we want perpetual distribution rights in China, meaning that they get to distribute the movie in China forever and they get to keep all the money from China. So they get to put it in theaters, they get to put it on DVDs, they get to put it on pay TV, they get to put it on streaming, they get to put it on VR headsets, whatever they want, forever, for $50 million. Plus, they got ownership of a portion of the movie. So if the movie ever made money, they would get some of the money. And so they put in $50 million. So now do the math, 40 plus 50 plus 80 gets us to $170 million. That's why Luc Besson only had $7 million at risk. He only had $7 million at risk. It's truly a remarkable feat. It will never happen again. It will never happen again for so many reasons. But this is 2015. You cannot find a Chinese investor willing to do this anymore. Capital controls in China have shut that market down. And in fact, many of the investors in the independent film space in the United States have left the market as well. Between what streaming has done to independent film and your expectation that you watch independent films on streaming services, not in theaters, there's just a much, much smaller theatrical market for independent films now. So the pre-sales market is much smaller than it used to be as well. The financiers have largely left the market. It doesn't help that we now have interest rates at 5%. So an investor who's trying to decide, do I invest in independent film or do I just put my money into a US Treasury bond earning 5%? They give up on film. And so it's much harder now. Not to say it doesn't happen. Movies are still greenlit every single day. It still happens. It's just harder than it used to be. But Luc Besson did what I call the first law of film finance. And if you've read the book, I'm sorry, Chris.
Yeah.
Like Chris, if you read the book like Chris, you know the book is all about the first law of film finance, which says that the market value, that didn't format, right? That's right. The market value has to be bigger than the financing plan, and the financing plan has to be bigger than the budget. The market value is the amount of revenue you expect to come in to pay all the financiers plus yourself, the producer. And so it's an estimate, it's a projection. It turns out with Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, everybody who was guessing the market value guessed wrong by at least half. But the market value is how much money is going to come in. The financing plan is this. How you're going to raise your money from tax incentives, from pre-sales, from financiers, whatever it is. So the market value has to be much bigger than the financing plan. In my book, I show that it has to be almost twice as much. Because if it's not almost twice as much, then you're not going to be able to repay all your investors. They're going to be angry with you. They're not going to invest in your next movie. So it has to be, the market value has to be substantially bigger than the financing plan. And the financing plan has to be bigger than the budget. You need a financing plan bigger than a budget because you need to have money in case something goes wrong. The worst thing you can do is not finish your movie. There are so many of those in the world. So many unfinished movies sitting on hard drives that the world will never see because the producers ran out of money. And so by having extra money in your financing plan, it helps you ensure that your movie gets finished. And so Luc Besson, I don't know that he had this written anywhere, but he knew this, he did this. He made sure that his market value was bigger than his financing plan, and his financing plan was bigger than his budget. I will mention that I think this is a bit of an unfair question that I asked you earlier. I asked how did Valerian perform financially? I didn't say for whom, right? For Europa, it performed, I mean, they lost $7 million. They lost $7 million. For the exhibitors, for the theaters, they brought in $186 million. They probably got to keep $100 million of it. They sold some popcorn. They paid their employees. They paid the electric bills. They paid the rent. They did fine. So the exhibitors did fine. Europa, not so much. Fundamental films lost all 50 million or very close to it because it performed really poorly in China too. But the distributors, STX, E1, Lionsgate, Disney, those are the people who took the big financial hit. The exhibitors, I'm sorry, the distributors in total probably lost over 100 million. STX in particular, STX I'm guessing paid 30 million for the right to sell, right to distribute the movie. Plus, they may have paid up to $60 million for P&A. prints and advertising, the marketing cost of the movie. So STX may have paid $90 million to distribute this movie and only gotten $20 million back. A loss of $70 million. And so that's why we don't have STX anymore. The other one important thing that I will tell you that is in my book, should you choose to read it, like Chris, is the most important determinant of career success for producers, amongst the producers that I interviewed, is experience. The producers who worked for somebody else for at least 8 years produce movies with bigger budgets, they have bigger box office numbers, they have more votes on IMDb, in other words, more people are watching their movies. They get to the more sophisticated parts of film finance faster. They get to work with bigger stars faster. And so working for somebody else for 8 years, if you want to be a producer, is absolutely critical to your success. It gives you credibility, it gives you skills, it gives you connections. The people who don't work for somebody else typically raise the money for their first film from friends and family, which is fine if your family has a last name like Gates or Bezos. But if not, it usually means you're making a really small film. The people who work for somebody else first raise their money from institutional investors like, back in the day, Fundamental Films, or from studios and production companies, bigger production companies that have a fund to invest in films. And so taking the time and gaining experience is super, super, super important. I will take questions in a little bit, but I think right now Rhonda and I are going to sit by a fire, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish we had one. Thank you. That was perfect. So throwing all that money around just makes it seem, it's kind of obscene. Now when I go to a movie, I'm going to really look at it more closely.
Well, it is the most expensive art form in the world.
It's just amazing to me. I don't get it. But anyways. So what originally sparked your passion for showbiz?
So I was a pretty normal finance professor until I got tenure. And then I was told I needed to teach a new elective. And we had just come out of the 2008-2009 financial crisis, and I had seen a ton of my really great students not get jobs. And I knew that we had a really good recession-resistant industry right here that we weren't serving. And so I had never worked a day in entertainment finance, but I knew we had a huge alumni network here in the business, and so they were kind enough to let me interview them and ask, what do I need to teach so that my students will win the job interview? And
were you a film buff all your life? I mean, is this a long passion that...
I always liked movies. We had, bless you, we had HBO when I was a child, and my parents didn't block it. So I remember watching, like, oh boy, things I should not have watched. An American Werewolf in London when I was 7 or 8 years old.
Got it.
And then it went from there. So yeah, I always enjoyed film.
And you made me think, this isn't on my list of normal questions, but Blair Witch Project, would that be like one of the most successful?
Oh, the most successful.
Okay.
The most successful independent film of all time,
Okay.
without a doubt.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Paranormal Activity. Paranormal Activity.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Because they made it for $25,000.
Yeah, something ridiculously
Yeah.
small, yeah. Okay, listening to you made me think about that, so I didn't think about it when I was reading the book. Okay, so
And then Paranormal Activity was produced by Jason Blum. He then created Blumhouse Films, which is now the leading, I mean, they are probably financially the most successful independent film company.
Really?
Yeah, because they do super cheap horror. Super cheap horror.
Is Working Title independent or? You know?
I don't remember.
I don't either. Okay, just thought. Okay, so let's get back to the real question, so I'm not like just going crazy here on my own. So the journey of financing a film, as we have seen, is complex to say the least, long and arduous. And as I was reading, I was wondering, is it better to have a lot of investors, or is it better just to be able to go to one Bill Gates and say, can you just finance my film?
One investor is always better, because the more investors you have, the more people who are going to have an opinion. They're going to want to read the script, they're going to want to offer their thoughts, they're going to want to show up on set. And so, as somebody, one of the producers I interviewed for the book said, the more people you put in the car, the harder it is to drive.
That's a good one, yeah. Okay, I get that. So the pitch for your film is absolutely instrumental in getting others both financially and to just work on the film. Crew, stars, whatever. So I was thinking about that pitch is very, very essential. So how does one learn to pitch successfully? How can you train yourself for that?
Pitch.
And practice makes perfect?
Practice makes perfect. There are two pitches that every filmmaker needs. One is the creative pitch, the other is the financial pitch.
Ah.
And they're different. The creative pitch is meant to attract people who are creative, whether that's the directors, the actors, or the key parts of the crew. The financial pitch is to get financiers engaged. And a sophisticated financier is interested in the creative part, but they really need the financial part. And a good producer is pitching everyone they meet all the time. I now know of 3 movies that were financed in the grocery store because the producer had a conversation with the person in line in front of them.
I believe
And
that totally.
movies that were financed on airplanes, in churches, at soccer games, just anywhere you can find someone to talk to, pitch your film. And you will get good because you will see the eyes glaze over. And that means you need to get your pitch better.
And you have to truly, truly believe in that film.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, to the nth degree.
Because nobody else does.
Yeah.
Nobody else does.
When you're putting out that kind of money, I mean, that's not monopoly money, that's real. So do you feel that federal, state, and local arts agencies are doing enough to fund independent film as a valued art form? I know that like in Europe, Mexico, Canada, France, all different, Sweden I think, a lot of European national funding is available. So what's up with us?
We suck. Yes, the U.S. government and the state governments are choosing to fund film through tax incentives rather than grants. But we are funding film, and we fund a lot. California spends $330 million a year on film tax incentives. Georgia last year was over $4 billion. And so we are funding it, just not in the nice ways that other countries do.
You know, in reading the book, and I read that part, and I went, oh, that's why everybody is filming in Georgia now. I didn't know that. That's where Tyler Perry's studio is. And that's a big hub now. It's really taken away a lot from Hollywood.
Yes, and all the Marvel movies are shot there because of the tax incentives.
Very interesting. It's really interesting to read his book, I have to say. I learned a lot. I learned an absolute
I also
lot.
want to say, Rhonda thought we were going to have about 6 people here tonight because it's finance.
I did not. Don't say you're lying. I also, just on the record, said 20, 25 minutes you could talk about your book. Not 20, okay? Setting that straight, okay. So, talk about your writing process. We have a lot of students here. Maybe they will become academic. Give them some gems, some wisdom here.
My process for this book, I did almost all the interviews first before I put a single word on the page. So I did the interviews over about 6 months. And then I write 3 hours every morning. And I write as much as I can standing up. And I use a standing desk. And then I stop. And I don't do anything else, any more writing for the rest of the day. And I'm a firm believer that we are most productive first thing in the morning. The science, when you sleep, your brain shrinks. And when your brain shrinks, the space that it no longer occupies is filled by your spinal fluid. And the spinal fluid's job is to basically flush the toxins out of your brain. And so that's what happens every night when you sleep. And so when you wake up in the morning, your brain is at its best. And so those first 3 hours of the morning, if you are doing anything but being productive, you are wasting them. And so use those first 3 hours, treat them like they are precious. They are so important to your work and to your productivity.
So 3 productive hours, my boss can hear that. I'm only working 3 hours a day. And you said you did all these interviews. Did you have to travel to people, and how did you find these people? Was it just like word of mouth? Hey, I'm writing this book. Do you know anybody, or how did that work out?
In scientific terms, it's snowball sampling. So, oh boy, in college, did anybody sell the knives? Anybody want to admit that they sold the knives? No? So back in the 90s, I sold the knives. And when I sold the knives, we were trained that you end the knife sale by asking them to give you contacts. And that is so important with research like this, because people do not want to talk about the finances, especially if they're movies that failed. And so I needed really kind introductions to people so that they would be willing to talk about it. And so it was hard. I got to 60. I didn't think I would get over 50. But just thankfully, and the key introduction, unbelievably, came from my aunt in Scottsdale, Arizona, who is a gastroenterologist, not a filmmaker. But her cousin, Brad Zions, was one of the first employees at America Online. And he retired at the age of like 32 with so much money. And then, as people do when they retire at the age of 32 with so much money, he became a film producer. And so she introduced me to Brad, and then Brad introduced me to about 4 other people, and then those 4 people introduced me to a whole bunch of other people, and that rounded out the book.
Wow. Everybody knows somebody, I tell you. So I think I know the answer, and we may all know the answer to this question of what it would have been 10 years ago and what it is now, but is it difficult to get projects with middle-aged women of color for independent films, or even just people of color, to get greenlit? The stats are low.
Pass. I mean, well, for starters, it's difficult to get any independent film greenlit. It happens every single day. There's an independent film that's greenlit, but every single day there are many others that aren't. And the financiers are the people who make effectively the green lighting decision. Mm-hmm. So if the financiers want to see a woman of color in the film, then that's what they're going to finance. And the reality is, the wealth in this country is amongst white men.
Got it. I mean, I think that there is some melting of those icebergs, but it's very slow. That's my opinion.
Very slow.
Yeah, I'm being optimistic. Okay, my last question, and I didn't give you this one in advance. So, you talked about the pre-sales for the exhibitors in their theaters. We're not seeing a lot of theaters anymore either. More and more are getting closed down. What's taking that place? Is that like streaming channels?
Right. So we've lost or we will lose by the time all this shakes out, about 20% of the theaters from pre-COVID to 2025. And in some ways that's a good thing, because most theaters sit empty 99% of the time. Most seats never get sold. The theaters that are packing the most punch these days are IMAX and the other large format. IMAX contributed, oh my gosh, I don't remember the exact numbers on Dune 2 were ridiculous, because it was like 0.8% of the theaters were IMAX, but IMAX drew like 70% of the revenue. It was stunning. So that's a reflection of people will go to the theater if the theater experience is good,
Mhm.
and most theater experiences now are not good. And so that's why people sit at home and watch it on Netflix.
So that whole chunk of pre-sale, is that just get taken out of the equations?
So the pre-sale, again, the producer is selling to the distributor the right to put the movie in the theater. The
Okay,
distributor then puts it in AMC and the Regal and all the
Right.
theater chains. And so the money goes back to the distributor. And then if the distributor has made enough money, then they start paying back the producer.
okay, but if the money to the distributor, if the distributor does not have theaters to get it into, will they then distribute to
They won't
Netflix
buy.
or nothing? Okay, I mean, will distributors die out?
There will be fewer, for sure. And I mean, we're already seeing that on the independent side. It's not, I mean, you all know A24, you all know Neon. Where do we go after that? Like, it gets very
Yeah.
small after.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we want to hear from you. What questions?
We want to hear from you.
What questions do you have for Professor Offenberg? Oh, there, where am I going? You may, of course.
Hi. First off, thank you, Dr. Offenberg.
Hi.
My question for you is, do you think in the next couple of years we're going to see a lot more projects with lower budgets just because they don't have the box office revenue punch anymore?
Yes, absolutely. Do you like this? You want microphone?
Yeah.
You want me to croon? I mean, that's just the math. People pre-COVID, the box office in the United States was about 11 billion a year, and we will likely not get back to that for at least another decade, because fewer people are going, but we'll eventually get there because of inflation, not because more people are going. Inflation in dollars and inflation in population, the US population grows about 1% a year. So, because theatrical is shrinking and because marketing just keeps getting more expensive, then yes, people are going to spend less on budgets.
A follow-up question to that. Do you think that could encourage independent film because then you need less money to get going on your project?
I think it will encourage AI-created film. I know, right?
The one question I didn't ask about. I don't know if this makes sense, and it kind of piggybacks off of her. Her question is, given what's going on now post-COVID with AI and so forth, how would, especially for some of our students here who are independent, who will most likely be independent filmmakers, like how can they navigate through the current, what's going on currently, so they can get the projects they need to get done, or they want to see get done?
Again, the most important thing is go work for somebody else, because I think now in particular is a really difficult time to be out on your own because of the threats of AI and because there's just so much unknown. And so I think working for somebody else for a period of at least 8 years and getting that experience, getting those connections and seeing how all of this shakes out will be really helpful in determining what path to take. Because frankly, I don't have a clue. Like AI, AI is the worst it's ever going to be today. It's only going to get better. It's only going to get more effective at writing scripts, at creating video, at creating characters, at creating performances, at creating scores, at creating makeups, at creating wardrobe, at creating lighting. Like, it's only going to get better in every possible aspect of filmmaking. And so, work for somebody else until we really understand how this is going to happen.
More like lay low and observe.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ready? Jan?
Hi, David. Thanks for coming to speak to us. You brought up your first rule of financing, which is market value versus financing versus I believe budget. Yeah. I'm having an interesting discussion right now because projects I'm working on, we're looking at different budget levels, and there's, on one hand, we want to raise as much money as possible, right? Because it's like, oh, you get to make the exact movie you want to make, or maybe even a better one, and get all the days and all the things you want. But I heard a piece of advice from the CEO of Jamie Foxx's company. The name escapes me right now, and he said, and he started as a producer by basically producing 18 first-time filmmakers in a row. That was kind of like how he made his niche. He just found first-time filmmakers and kept making movies for them. And he said the best thing that he thought anybody could do was actually to make a movie for about $100,000, because that way, if it doesn't make its money back, nobody's angry. So, do you lean more towards get as much money as possible, or do you think he was giving good advice?
Some of both. I mean, I've seen people be successful on both paths. The $100,000 movie is great because chances are that money's going to come from friends and family. If it bombs, chances are Thanksgiving's not going to be that awkward, right? Because that's a real thing. Like, people lose their parents' money, people lose their grandparents' money, and relationships don't heal because of it. And so if you can keep the price point down and raise the money from friends and family and not destroy their personal savings, then that's a good thing. There's also, I wish I could remember where it was. There was a recent study that showed that if you have the most A-list stars, it helps your movie. And if you have stars, anything beneath that, it doesn't help your movie.
It was Liz Manna's show.
There you go. Thank you. And so if you have enough money to get these people, then that's great. If you don't have enough money to get these people, then I think being down here is so much smarter these days.
Thank you.
Good question. We'll get over there in a second.
Let's say everything goes right for an independent film producer. How much money could they expect to receive from tax incentives alone?
So it depends where you're shooting. The great thing about Canada is, so many great things about Canada. In parts of Canada, what Luc Besson did is he stacked his tax incentives. So he got a tax incentive from the federal government plus a tax incentive from the BC government. That doesn't happen in the United States. Like if you're getting the Georgia tax incentive, you're not also getting a United States federal tax incentive because we don't have one. And so in a best case scenario, I think it's about 40%. There are a few countries in Europe now at around 40%. Chances are there are places you don't want to shoot because there's no crew, there's no equipment, there's no chance of actually making a good movie there. And so the decision can't just be based on tax incentives, it has to be based on so many other things.
While he's walking around, so if you do a road movie in the United States where you're filming some in Georgia and some in Idaho and some in, can you get tax incentives?
Yes, yeah. And there's actually a Washington DC tax incentive, which is very small, but a lot of producers will go there to shoot exteriors, and they shoot the exteriors, they get the outside of the buildings, they might get people walking, their actors walking in front of the buildings, and they spend $200,000 and they get some of that back from the DC government.
And the Hallmark Channel is in Vancouver, so that's where they do all their movies, all their TV movies.
Amazing movies.
Yeah. Hey, it pays the bills.
I know, I have friends who made them.
Yeah, me too. Who's our next question?
Oh, Becky.
Hello. I'm curious to know if a film has ever been funded by something like a VC, or if something like in that realm where a Y Combinator, but for films, would ever be viable. Could you ever like take a film and make it purely almost business and sell it to these other players that don't normally work in film financing?
Yes, so a venture capital, so I think every film is effectively funded by a venture capitalist because a venture capitalist, in my mind, is somebody investing in a new venture, and every film is a new venture. And if you think you've come up with a new way to finance a movie, I promise somebody's already done it. I have people all the time approach me and they're like, I've got this new way. We're gonna bring in institutional capital. I'm like, yeah, sure you are. Yeah. And I mean, there have been waves of this. So there were the German investors, and then the insurance companies, and then the Wall Street hedge funds, and blah, 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 blah. And they all come in, they think they've got a new way to do it, and then they leave 5 years later with their tail between their legs. It's a tough business. It is a tough business. It is a sweepstakes business. Either you win the sweepstakes, you're Jason Blum, you have your paranormal activity, and you have money to make movies for the rest of your life, or you lose, and you move on and do something else.
Okay, hold on a second, it's coming.
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering, the 60 interviews you had, did you get any bad feedback?
What do you mean bad feedback?
Well, I mean, any negative?
Saying don't make independent movies?
Yeah.
All of them. So what's remarkable about successful independent film producers is that they have the ability to refuse to take no for an answer. And no matter how bad it gets, they're gonna get it done. And it's a characteristic that I don't have. Like, people tell me no, and I'm like, all right, that's cool. I'll do the other thing. But they don't. They just do not have that in their DNA. And so they every single one of them said, this is a terrible career. I wouldn't wish this on anybody. There are so much better ways to make money, but I love doing it. And so I think that's, yeah, part of the business.
Yeah, you hear that from screenwriters too.
Hi, Professor.
Peter?
I was wondering, we were kind of talking about theaters and like the system for that and exhibiting films. And given like, I know a lot of the biggest theater change are like dealing with bankruptcy. So that plus like changing consumer preferences, plus like you said, only like 20% of the theaters are IMAX, but they're like generating most of the revenue. Do you foresee like a really large shakeup in like the system and the way we do theaters, and like a lot of theaters getting cleared out, or like new companies coming into that, or possibly studios themselves coming in, becoming the exhibitors? Because right now it looks like it's destined to change, kind of.
Boy, that is such a tough question, Peter. I think that the consumer experience has to get better, and IMAX is part of that, but that can't be all of it, because IMAX is expensive. And who's gone to a $4 movie in the past couple of years? Just kidding, we're in LA, it doesn't happen. In some parts of the country, if you go to Las Vegas, you can go to a movie for $4, I promise. And so there's a price point that some consumers just need to be at to go see a movie. And so we need to have a range of experiences from cheap to IMAX. The studios do not want to own theaters. They have been in that business in the past, they hated being in that business. So yes, we need to do better to make the consumer experience better and to make theaters viable. And nobody's done a good job of figuring it out yet. What would you do? What would you do?
I don't know if this is the best idea for like the sake of the arts, but kind of like lean into the superhero, and like, I know you've talked about like the experience, like these like big experience where a superhero, I remember you said like the Minions thing where everyone like showed up in suits, or I don't know, lean into like the really big blockbusters, and this isn't really good at a place like this, but go away from independent film. That's what I feel like, but at least make like the most money if you're trying to go for that.
Hi, Dr. Offenberg. So my question is, as a film investor, what would you look for that would convince you to invest in a particular film? What are those key things that these investors are like, okay, that stands out to me, I'm investing in this film, versus not?
Something other than a financial return that's valuable to you. So in the book I talk about, oh my gosh, can I remember them? 4 things that investors are hoping to get out of their investment other than a monetary return. So some want the social life, some are doing it because they want to leave a legacy, some are doing it because they have a social purpose, they're trying to advocate for whatever their cause is, and some want jobs for their loved ones. So they're investing because they want their wife to have an acting role. They want their son to operate the camera, whatever it is. And so having one of those 4 makes the investment much more palatable, because you're going to lose money. You're going to lose money. That's just the nature of independent film. Like, not on all of them, hopefully, but on most of them. And so having something else that you can fall back on as a win is super important. Is that?
Yes, thank you.
Good questions, guys. Any more questions out here?
For the 60 interviews that you did, besides the stubbornness and the 8 years under a mentorship, what else was like a unifying factor that you found in all of these, or maybe most of these interviews?
That's a great question. So I don't think it's a unifying factor, but it sort of separates into one of two camps. Either they had early success, and because of that early success, they had the financial wherewithal to continue, or they had a partner who was able to support them for years so that they could continue. Because one way or the other, you need a whole lot of money in the bank. Because a typical producer on the first film is going to lose money, not make money, and not because the movie loses money, but because they put in their own money to get development started, and maybe sometimes much more, and then the movie then doesn't make money. And you might do that for 2 or 3 or 4 films before you finally make a movie that actually generates an income for you, both as a producer fee and on the back end. And so having wealth helps a lot. And so, again, to your earlier point of, who are the people? Like, if you look at the people I interviewed, it's mostly white men. And I didn't try for white men. I started with 4 women. I started with 4 women and asked those 4 women to introduce me to other producers, and guess who they introduced me to?
White men. Any other questions? Anyone? Oh, over here, please.
Hi. I guess I would ask not so much from the producing standpoint, but more from like someone who wants to direct these independent films and maybe work with other people to help finance them. You talked a lot about getting this experience and working for others and learning that. Would you recommend, while you do that, to make things that are super low budget and maybe to get into festivals, and like how much that experience, both working for people but also having things under your belt, even if it's tiny festivals and stuff, helps when you are trying to eventually like sell a feature or a show?
Yes, you should absolutely always be shooting. You should always be shooting. It's super important. And circling back to the 8 years of experience, the range of experiences that these producers have is vast. They're not all working as assistants at agencies for 8 years. They were working as line producers. They were working as various crew roles. They were working as investment bankers, completely outside the entertainment business. One was a construction manager, like remodeling people's kitchens, because it turns out remodeling a kitchen is an awful lot like making an independent film. You have a crew, you have a star, the homeowner, who's a pain in your butt. You have unreasonable deadlines. You have all the same problems to deal with, and you have to make sure that you learn how to control the situation so it doesn't get out of hand. One of my favorites was, oh my gosh, what's his name? I don't remember his name. His job was he would call nurses and try to convince them to work at a hospital.
Wow.
And because his job was basically starting from zero with somebody that didn't know him and convincing them to do something they didn't want to do, he just got really good at convincing investors, starting from zero to invest in you. And so it's not important that you have 8 years of film experience, it's important that you have 8 years of experience that teaches you a skill set that's unique, that allows you to contribute to your producing team in a way that other people can't.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm curious, from everything you've seen, what do you think the value is, if any, in making short films in college?
I think it's, if you can do it cheaply, I think that's really, really important. And cheaply in part because like you're not going to make any money on a short film, ever. And in part because learning to control budget now is a skill set that's going to serve you very well in the years to come. And making short films in colleges is also important because you're going to be around people who hopefully you're going to be around for the rest of your career. And so building relationships with them now while they're nobodies is so important because someday they're going to be somebody and they're going to be able to help you out. And so I think having that experience is super critical.
Thanks.
I think we had one more question over here. Do we have on this side? No? Okay, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much for all your questions.